Coming live from the studio, this is All Sports with Gerardo. Thank you for watching another episode of All Sports. This is your host, Gerardo. So today I'm going to talk about the Major League Baseball trade deadline, the current standings of teams in both the American League and the National League. I'm going to tell you about the position that they're in and the potential run that they can have for the rest of the season after acquiring other players to better up their team now that they have an opportunity to contend for a spot in the postseason at the end of the season. So I'll tell you about players that got traded to different teams, tell you about that team's position, and tell you about if I can see that team being better, the type of run that they may do the rest of the season and how they will play, and if they have a potential of being a contender and making it into the playoffs. Also, I will give you an update of the divisions in baseball in both the American League and the National League with their current standings. I will also talk about NFL training camp as well. That just got underway. The NFL season's approaching in just over a month from now. Training camp has started. The preseason's coming up in a couple weeks. The Hall of Fame game, the Hall of Fame inductions. This year's Hall of Famers getting inducted to the NFL Hall of Fame in Canton, Ohio. So the NFL season's just around the corner. I will also talk about predictions that could happen and who can compete for a starting job or who's going to be a backup at almost every position. I will also get into the battles of competition at training camp for which players are going to be starters and which players are going to be backups. Almost every NFL team has competition, and there's going to be a battle of what player is going to be the starter and what player is going to land up being the backup. So every team has competition at almost every position. So we'll just have to wait and see what happens during training camp and in the preseason games. So to start off, just a few weeks ago, I did travel to Florida. If you have not yet checked out my videos, there will be videos from different stadiums across Florida, which will include TIAA Bank Field in Jacksonville, Florida, Raymond James Stadium and Tropicana Field in Tampa, Florida, and Hard Rock Stadium, American Airlines Arena, and Marlins Park in Miami. So you'll see different videos from different stadiums across Florida. And just so you remember, Tropicana Field will be posted at the middle of August. That will be the first video. And then Marlins Park will be posted in the middle of September. That will be the second video from the baseball stadiums. But every other video from the other stadiums across Florida will be posted, and they're already posted, so check those videos out. They're all great videos, and going back to the baseball videos, I can only show one at a time, so you'll definitely like the videos. You'll just have to wait and see when I post them and check those videos out. So let's dive into what I'm going to talk about today. To start off, I'm going to finish off by telling you the rest of the players that got acquired from potential contending teams that have the opportunity of making it to this year's postseason. So to start off, Cole Hamels was acquired from the Texas Rangers. He will be going to the Chicago Cubs, and the Chicago Cubs sent Eddie Butler and some other players to be named later to the Texas Rangers. The Arizona Diamondbacks acquired Eduardo Escobar. The Philadelphia Phillies acquired Adriel Cabrera from the New York Mets. The Milwaukee Brewers acquired Mike Moustakas from the Kansas City Royals. The New York Yankees acquired Lance Lynn. The Atlanta Braves acquired Adam Duvall. The Boston Red Sox acquired Ian Kinsler from the Los Angeles Angels. The Philadelphia Phillies acquired Wilson Ramos. The Seattle Mariners acquired Cameron Maybin from the Miami Marlins. The Los Angeles Dodgers acquired John Axford. The Pittsburgh Pirates acquired Chris Archer. The Los Angeles Dodgers acquired Brian Dozier from the Minnesota Twins, and they sent Logan Forsythe and other players back to the Minnesota Twins. So there were a lot of moves that took place around baseball. I named all the big names that were on the move to potential contending baseball teams that have the opportunity to making it to the playoffs this season. So there were a lot of other moves that took place as well. But now that the trade deadline has passed, these last 2 months of baseball is very important for contending baseball teams. They want to make it to the playoffs. They want to have a better team. They want to make it into the playoffs and have a potential of making it to the World Series and even winning it. So every team has the opportunity that acquired players and that's contending for the playoffs to be better and to make it to the playoffs. So we're just going to have to wait and see what happens. These last 2 months of baseball is going to be very exciting. I can't wait to see what happens. I want to see who makes it into the playoffs. And I want to especially see what 2 teams are going to make it to the World Series and contend to be the champions. So I'm looking forward to that, and we'll just have to wait and see what happens there. So moving on now that all these players that had the potential of being traded at the trade deadline were on the move, there were also some other players that were rumored to be traded. The Washington Nationals rumored that they were willing to trade Bryce Harper, but he ended up staying with the Washington Nationals. There were other players that had the potential to be on the move, but some players stayed. A lot of them left their former teams and now they're on different teams. Looking at every division in both the American League and the National League, the races are very tight. In the next few weeks, we're going to be able to see, now that the trade deadline's passed and these teams that are contending for the playoffs got other players to make their team better, we'll be able to have the opportunity to see how well these teams are performing, and they're going to be able to see if they have a chance of making it to the playoffs. And we'll also be able to see, looking at every division in baseball, who has the greatest opportunity. We're also going to be able to see every team in baseball and see who has the greatest opportunity of making it to the playoffs, winning their division, and what teams are going to be contending for a wild card spot if they do not win their division. So I'm looking forward to that. Next week I will give you an update of every division in both the American League and the National League. So let's just let a week pass by so we can have some better and more current standings now that July's over, and I'm looking forward to these last 2 months of baseball. It's going to be very exciting. Moving on now, at the end of July in the NFL, training camp starts, training camp begins. First, the rookies report to training camp, and then a few days later, the veterans report to training camp, and then the whole team has to report to training camp. NFL training camp is mandatory. All players have to be there. But big name players that have a dispute of their contract or they're holding out on trying to get a new deal, the first few days they will not show up to training camp in hopes that they can reach a new deal. And otherwise, every other player needs to be at training camp. It's mandatory. And players that do not show up to training camp, regardless of their situation, are fined every day. And it just keeps adding up the more you miss training camp. So now that training camp starts at the end of July, you, the fans, have the opportunity of going out and seeing your favorite team practice and scrimmage at the end of July until like the middle of August. So if you have not been out to training camp, or you have been to training camp, I highly recommend it. You get to see your favorite players or your team up close. And at the end of training camp, you even have the opportunity of getting autographs from some of your favorite players. So I always look forward to training camp every year. I go out there all the time, so I hope you guys do as well. It's a great time, it's a great opportunity, so take advantage of that. Also, with training camp starting, you get to see your favorite players, but another thing as well is you get to see the competition that the team has. At this time, every team has about 90 players on the roster. And before, after like the second or third preseason game, they would cut the roster down to 75 players. And then after the last preseason game, they would cut the roster from 75 players to 53 players. Because every NFL team has a 53-man roster. But starting last year, instead of doing it in that order and process of doing two different phases of cutting down players, now after the last preseason game, they go from 90 players down to 53, so they don't do it the way they used to. They just cut the roster at once. But at training camp, you definitely have players that you never heard about or seen before, so they have the opportunity of contending and battling for a starting position, and really giving an opportunity and a chance of being able to compete. And they can prove to the coaches and to the team that they're worth keeping on the 53-man roster. So there's always competition at almost every position, and I always look forward to seeing the competition because you always have quarterbacks battling for a starting position, wide receivers, running backs, and different positions on the team. And if you never heard or seen this player before, it's your opportunity to see him. And a lot of times there's players that go undrafted or players that you never heard of that are not in a starting position, or they're on the practice squad and they land up being kept on the 53-man roster and becoming a starter. And there's a lot of players that I know, especially on the Broncos, that were undrafted or on the practice squad, that they became a starter. And there's some that have even won the Super Bowl and even made it to the Hall of Fame. So just because they're a big name and you know who they are, doesn't mean that other players that are not starters deserve to be on the 53-man roster, because there's other players besides the starters that are very good. And if they get the opportunity to show their talent, even if it's not on the current team that they're on, they can definitely show it on another team and have an opportunity of playing football. So always look at the competition. We all have our favorite players and we all like the starters, but players that you don't know or the backups on the team, they also have an opportunity of becoming a starter or even becoming a really good player as well. So always look forward to training camp and watch the preseason games, because you get to see all these players battle to be on the 53-man roster. It's very exciting, and in less than a month from now, the NFL season starts. I'm really looking forward to watching the NFL season, watching my favorite team, the Denver Broncos. I hope they play better this year. They definitely made some moves this offseason. I believe they got a quarterback now. They made the team better in free agency and in the draft, so I'm definitely looking forward to seeing how the Broncos play and other individual players and teams across the NFL. Canton, Ohio is home of the NFL Hall of Fame. Every year we have NFL players that have retired that get the opportunity to be on the NFL Hall of Fame ballot and get voted into the NFL Hall of Fame. There's definitely a lot of players that deserve to be in the Hall of Fame. So every year the NFL season starts in Canton, Ohio. There's always two different teams that play the first preseason game in Canton, Ohio. You got the players that are on the NFL Hall of Fame ballot that got voted into the Hall of Fame. They get inducted to the Hall of Fame in Canton, Ohio. So the NFL season always starts in Canton, Ohio. And if you have not, I highly recommend that you go check out the NFL Hall of Fame in Canton, Ohio. It's definitely a must-see thing. It's very nice to see all your favorite players that are in the Hall of Fame are in that museum. And another thing too, the way the Hall of Fame works is, so like let's say one of your favorite players had a very good career. Like for example, I'll tell you about Peyton Manning. So he won Super Bowl 50 and he retired 2 years ago. And the way it works is when this player retires, for example, Peyton Manning, he retired 2 years ago, and every player that has the opportunity of making it into the Hall of Fame has to wait 5 years before they're eligible to get into the Hall of Fame. And that's because if this player decides to come back another season and unretire instead of retire, then they don't want them to be in the Hall of Fame right away. So like if Peyton Manning decided to unretire and come back to the NFL, like for example this year, then he would have to wait another 5 years. But because he didn't unretire and he decided to retire, now we're going to be going into the third year that Peyton Manning has retired. So he has 3 more years left. He'll be eligible in 2021. So Peyton Manning retired 2 years ago. He has 3 more years left out of the 5 years. And in 2021, Peyton Manning will be eligible to be inducted into the NFL Hall of Fame. He's definitely a first ballot Hall of Famer. There's a lot of players that are definitely a first ballot Hall of Famer, but there's some that don't make it into the Hall of Fame right away, and it takes years for them to get in. So after those 5 years have passed, then these players are eligible to get into the Hall of Fame. And once their name gets on the ballot, if the players do not get voted in the first year, then their name will be on the ballot the next year and then the following and then going forward. And until they get voted in, then they will make it into the Hall of Fame. So I highly recommend, if you have not been to Canton, Ohio, go out there, check out the Hall of Fame Museum. And if you get the opportunity of going when they induct the players into the Hall of Fame, that is definitely a must-see. It's a once-in-a-lifetime experience. If you definitely have a favorite player and you know what year they're going to get inducted, definitely make the effort of going out and seeing that. That's such a nice experience to witness. And it's a very nice place. And if you also get to check out the first preseason game, that's also great to see as well. And you definitely need to go check that out if you have not been out to the NFL Hall of Fame in Canton, Ohio. So going into next week, I will continue to talk about NFL training camp. I will give you an update of the upcoming NFL season. Also, the preseason games are getting ready to start next week as well. First week of preseason. I will give you an update in baseball of every division in both the American League and the National League. Also, the NBA schedule of every team and the primetime games on Christmas is getting ready to come out. The NBA season is coming up in a couple months. I'm looking forward to that. So I just want to say thank you to everybody that watches every episode of All Sports. Until next time, this is Gerardo.